Curious how to go from construction lumber like this to making something gorgeous like this? Stay tuned in this video as I take you through step by step the entire build process that went into making this custom tabletop and table base. Let's get to the shop. So first off here, I've got some 2x12s that started at 10 feet. I cut them all in half, so you see they're in 5-foot lengths now. I'm in a fairly small shop, so I don't have a lot of space to keep large lumber lying around. Cut it in half, bring it in here on the work table, save yourself some space. Now, I know there's a lot of speculation and rumors out there in the woodworking community on the internet, but I'm here to tell you that anytime you buy 2x10 or 2x12 dimensional lumber at one of your big box stores, it's typically going to be Southern Yellow Pine. Southern Yellow Pine, when you look it up on the Janka scale, I'll pull it up and show it to you here, is just about as hard as soft maple, and soft maple is used in a lot of furniture projects. But the first step in this entire project is getting this from what I consider rough cut lumber to actually milled, ready to use pieces. We need to make sure that all of these are completely flat, that all of our edges are square. We don't want any of these rounded over corners that you see here. So let's get over to the planer, then we'll hit the table saw, get these milled down to shape. Let's get it. I apologize for the awful lighting. I'm going through some funky stages in this tiny little shop, getting ready to put up shop lights in here. Now, when you start planing these, you might notice that some of these boards have a cup. What you want to do to mitigate that is have your cup facing up when you first start your cuts in the planer. That way you're shaving this top plane down flat. If you have it the other way around, your board could rock as it goes through the planer, and it's not going to give you a good level cut. So when you flip it, your planes are actually going to be off. In order to correct the problem, make sure your cups are always facing up, plane that top face down flat, and then when you flip it, you're going to mirror that cut on the top side, ensuring that you're perfectly flat and you have a good plane on both sides. All that being said, it's time to get these planed up, and then I'll meet you over at the table saw when we're finished. Make sure you've always got your hearing protection on anytime you're running one of these planers. I don't care what brand it is, and I don't care how much you paid for it. All of them will do damage to your ears. With our boards cut to size and the planing done, it's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work. Do you know that saying actually comes from woodworkers? Rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. It's because when you're going to use a table saw like this, you want to make sure that you don't have anything around your hands or your wrists dangling that could get caught up in that blade. Don't ever let me catch you using, something like gloves or wearing a sweatshirt with your sleeves hanging down. Your cuff gets caught in that blade, it's going to catch one of these carbide teeth and it's just going to suck your arm down into it. I don't know if that part about it being from woodworking is true or not, but it sounds good. So I've got our rip measured out to 10 3/4 inches here. We're using 2x12s, and these are actually at 11 1/8, 11 inches, give or take. So we're going to take all of these down to 10 1/2, but I just want to take a little bit off of this one side first, get rid of that factory rounded over edge, make sure everything's nice and straight, nice and plain. So that way when we glue everything up, everything's going to set nice and flush together. Let's go ahead and rip these down on the first side so we can twist them around and get down to our final dimension on the other. I almost broke one of my own rules and didn't have my ear protection in here. Let's get some Merle Haggard turned on and we'll get these ripped out. Now notice I ran that completely through the cut. I've got it caught on a stand down here on the end. I shut my blade off before I'm gonna go in here and start moving anything around. I do this with every single cut. You need to be as safe as you possibly can so that you can ensure that you can do this job for another 40 or 50 years. With our one side ripped down, you can take all of your strips that you cut off here and just throw them into the burn pile, because some of you guys are hanging on to your scraps for way too long. This your sign. Now we're gonna take our fence and we're gonna shrink it down to our final 10.5 inch width, right like that, and lock it down. Let's go ahead and get these finished up. All the work on the table saw done, we can take our ears out now. If there's anybody watching this that has connections with IsoTunes, tell them to get a hold of me, because I'd really like to get a pair for the shop here.
Call me! Call me! Call me! Call me! Call me! Call me!
Those cheapo depots do their job, but I wouldn't really recommend them to anybody. With all of our boards ripped to 10.5 inches, we're 1.25 inches thick, just a hair over to allow for some wiggle room when we go to sand. I need to figure out the orientation that I want these boards and how I want them to display. I really like this orientation here. This keeps all of the knots and all of the grain patterns fairly random. I think it's going to look really nice once we cut out our hole. Let me show you a reason as to why I chose this orientation and see if we can't spark some kind of controversy down in the comments section. If you've been around woodworking on YouTube, I'm sure you've heard about this before. Being in the field, I hadn't really heard it until I got to YouTube, but in YouTube's defense, I have learned a lot from its platform. Now, you've heard of smiley face and frown face, you've heard of alternating these, and I've seen a lot of gentlemen that know a lot more than I do argue for both ways. They say that it does matter, they say that it doesn't matter. If you have experience in this, leave me a comment down below and let me know what your experience has been. I don't know that I'm completely convinced, but to be on the safe side, we're going to go ahead and do that anyway. I've got a secret that I'm going to show you in that bag, but first we need to label all of these so that when it comes time to glue them up, we know which pair to which, and we keep our same orientation that we just came up with. To do this, I like to number these joint 1, joint 2, joint 3, and joint 4. Now I know which end is which because all of these numbers are facing me. I put a number on each board right where they joint together, so just like a puzzle, we know 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2. And now I'd like to take just a brief second to show you guys what's in this mystery bag. This is quite easily one of my favorite tools that I've ever owned, and it could actually save you a ton of money. So you've all seen the Festool Domino, right? Seems to be really big here on YouTube. Well, what I've got here is an electric doweling jointer. What this does is essentially the same function as a domino without the side-to-side action. It drills a straight hole consistently every single time that you put it on the wood so that you can put dowels in your joints, which adds strength and it helps keep everything aligned. biscuits are great for what they do, but they don't really add any kind of strength to your joint. I believe that the dowels do a similar job to what the Dominoes do for a fraction of the cost. And if you're interested in picking up one of these bad boys, if you're doing any kind of work like this, any kind of glue ups, I highly recommend that you pick one up. They don't hardly cost a thing compared to other tools that do a similar job. But I'll leave a link down in the description for you guys. This is an Amazon affiliate link. I do get a very small percentage back on this. So if you're planning on picking up this tool or any of the other tools or materials that you've seen in this video, be sure to use those links because every little bit helps such a small channel as mine. We need to mark right where our dowels are going to go in our tabletop here. Let's move our tool out of the way and I'll show you how we're going to accomplish this. Right where the boards are going to join with a dowel, you want to put a line through each side. We're going to come straight down through the middle and then add a couple more off of each side from that. So I would like one right here. Don't make your lines too fat. You want these to be precise. You want to be able to line that tool up right on your line so that you know when you put all these together, all of those dowels are going to line up and snug together nice and neat. Now we're going to come just about a foot to the left and a foot to the right and make another set of dowels. And then our last row is just going to be on the very ends of our two center joints here. We don't need to get dowels on the corners of these, as all of these are going to get cut off when we cut our circle anyways. Now we can move our boards out of our way. We know where we're drilling our dowels. We'll get these set up here one at a time and get those holes drilled in. And I'll show you my favorite way that I've come up with for drilling these in. Let me raise the camera up just a hair here. Much better. So I like to take one small clamp on one side, pull my board off just a few inches, and I'm going to clamp this board to the work table here. That makes sure when I'm putting pressure on this and drilling it, it's not going to slide and move around. It just did. Ignore that. Now I'm going to take my doweling tool. I've only got one drill bit in this. It gives you the option of drilling two dowels at once. I've only got the one in the right slot. I'm going to line the slot up with our mark on our board. And I'm going to get our other clamp and fasten down our tool to the board. Now everything is snug, everything is tight. The fence on here keeps it perfectly aligned at 90 degrees. All we have to do is turn it on and drill our hole. Right like that, you're done with it and you can move on to your other 16 holes. There you have it, 32 dowel holes drilled, perfectly. They're all going to align exactly where we want them when we do our glue up. That's how you knock out tabletop alignment in about 10 minutes. With all of our dowel holes drilled, let's go ahead and get all of our pipe clamps set up here. We'll get these stood up on end, get our glue applied, and clamp all of this tabletop together so it can sit overnight. With a handful of dowels and our bottle of Glue Mate 450, or as I like to call it, Titebond 3, I would only use Titebond 3 for a project like this. It's waterproofed. It's going to be your strongest bond when it's fully cured. It does take a little bit longer to set up, but that extra setup time is worth it with something as big as a tabletop like this. So I'm going to come along the top. Remember, these first couple boards, you don't have to be too crazy about the ends. You know those are going to get cut off anyways. But I make a nice little squiggly pattern. Make sure to get just a little bit down inside of our dowel holes. These dowels fit pretty tight into those holes, so we don't have to worry too awful much about getting a lot of glue in there, but you do want to make sure that that can get up into the dowel and cause it to swell, which is what gives it its pressure and its hold when the glue's dry. Come along with your glue spreading tool here. Make sure you're nice and even. Go ahead and insert your dowels. And then pull out your Dowel Setter 3000 here. Now with our number one edge against our second number one edge, we're just going to line up our marks. It should set on there. Nice and neat, right like that. We don't need to go crazy with it. Our clamps are going to pull everything together. And then starting from the center and working your way out, you're just going to start, I call it comparatively tightening your clamps. Kind of like tightening down the lug nuts on a tire. You want to do a random pattern, but you're working from the center out so that everything isn't getting squeezed to the center with your pressure. You're starting in the center and you're letting it naturally move out to the end of your glue up. And I'm going to start by just snugging all of these down. And then we'll go back through a second pass and really tighten down our clamps. You shouldn't need a whole bunch of force as long as you did everything correctly in the first steps. All of this should line up and it should fit together nice and snug and neat. And that's all you have to it. We're going to let this sit for 24 hours and completely set up and cure before we take it out of the clamps. It says on the bottle that after a few hours you can take it out of the clamps and let it continue to harden. I don't need the shop tonight, so I'm just going to let it sit all night long. We'll come back tomorrow, take it out of the clamps, and move on to the next steps. Now that we're out of the clamps, our first step really to making this circle is going to be finding the center of our square. We're setting it a little bit over 52 inches, so we'll just mark 26. Come over on this side, and we're setting it 60, so we'll go to 30 inches here and make a little plus. And now, where this is going to be beneficial is we'll be able to measure 24 inches out on all of our seams. I need to sand these down, even though we doweled things up, and whether you use a domino or a biscuit, sometimes these can be just a little bit off, especially with this southern yellow pine that we're using. It's really prone to twists and cups and things of that nature. So we need to address this and get it to shape, get it stained, get some finish on it so that we can install our C-channels. I try to do that within a couple days total. But what I'm going to do, just for the sake of saving time, is I'm going to measure 24 inches out on all of my seams, and I'm just going to make a line. As always, we're going to put our ears in. And with that, let's get started on sanding. And when I'm doing this, I'm taking my offhand and just checking the seam every now and then, seeing where we're at, seeing if we're fairly level. I'm also moving this around and kind of feathering it out and dispersing that sanding from the belt. The belt that I have on here is fairly aggressive, and if you don't watch it, you'll end up with deep gouges along the lengths of your seams, and that's going to make a lot of work when we go to get out the orbital sander after all of this. Everything nice and flat, I'm going to go ahead and set our tabletop up on blocks. When we sanded it down as aggressively as we did, it really heated up the wood on this, and wood has always got some kind of trapped moisture. It doesn't matter how dry you think it is, the moisture's in there. So you don't want the bottom setting flush up against your work table, as this can cause it to cup up, being that the top is hot. It's drying out rapidly. You want to give the bottom some room to breathe so that it can dry evenly. So let's go ahead and get blocks underneath this and lift it up off of our work table a little bit. Try to set the blocks in far enough so that you're not cutting them while you're cutting your circle. I know it's just scrap wood, but there's really no sense in tearing up more pieces than we need, right? Now with our glitter applied and we're breaking a little bit of sweat moving all this heavy stuff around, we need to reestablish where the center of our table is. I've already sanded off the little bit of marking that I put on there before. So let's go back and remark center again here. We've got 30 inches. And I believe our other mark was 26, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, I just caught myself. This does need to be the bottom side of this tabletop, as we're going to be putting a screw in it for our circle cutting jig. I can't believe I forgot that. It's been a minute since I've made one of these circle tables, but I'll admit when I'm wrong. I'll put it in the video. You won't ever catch me slipping. You won't catch me lying. It'll be right in here for you to laugh at. Let's flip this thing over and get to the bottom side. Man, I'll be happy when we drop a little weight. Come on. Ugh, it's unreal how heavy these tabletops are. So we didn't really mess up per se, we just skipped a step ahead. Usually I wouldn't stand the other side until we've already got the circle cut and we can flip it over when the top's a lot lighter. Now we have the top sanded already, so let's sand down the bottom and then we can cut our circle out. Finally. If only they put a dust collector port on that sander. There we go, reset back to 0. Now we've got the bottom side sanded. We're gonna mark the center here. And if I remember our measurements that we've measured twice now, it's gonna be 30. Still checked anyways. And 26. Now we put a plus in the center and we grab our drill, and I'm just gonna put a tiny little hole in this, and I'll tell you in a minute, I gotta cool off. With our center marked, we're ready to cut out the circle for our tabletop. I'm going to be using my plunge router for this. I've got a 48-inch circle cutting jig that I made. And we're going to put a screw through here into the center. The distance from our screw to the actual cutting bit that's in my router is 24 inches. That way when we're completely finished, we'll have exactly 48 inches across. What this is going to do is make a few passes and give us a perfect circle to work with. This won't plunge deep enough to actually go through the entire piece. So we're going to make a few passes, we're going to cut the line for our circle, and then we'll come back with the jigsaw and remove the bulk of our material, and then use a flush trim bit to finish up our line around the radius of our circle. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. First, you need to get your hole right in the center of your table, and I'm going to mount this with a panhead screw. Make sure you don't have a screw that's long enough that it's going to penetrate all the way down through the top of your table. I try to keep it between 1/4 of the way and halfway through, whatever your thickness comes out to be. I've got an upcut bit in this, so that way as we're cutting our circle, it's not forcing all of the sawdust down into our track. It should be lifting it back up and throwing it out. And we won't have to worry about our bit getting hung up on all of that clogged sawdust down in our cut. So let's get our ears on and we'll go ahead and start getting our circle established. Now our circle shape is cut. Let's remove our jig here. And we drilled our hole into the bottom side, so that way, by the time you flip it and you get your base installed in the underside of the table, you'll never even know that that hole was there. I'm gonna vacuum out our line so I can get out the jigsaw and follow this same cut all the way around the table and get rid of the bulk of our scrap on the outside here. Don't you hate when you organize the shop so well that you can no longer find the tools that you put up? That's what just happened with this jigsaw here. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make myself a series of relief cuts over here on my shallow sides on all four. So as I cut these, they'll just come off as quarters. And you don't need to cut up to the edge of your table. You've got about a 1/4 inch space for the channel that you routed into this. So just cut up to the very front edge and we don't have to worry about doing any kind of damage to our actual tabletop. Snap my blade off. Guys, don't ever buy these cheap do-it-best blades. They are most certainly not doing it best. Let's continue our cut. Now what I want to do when I start cutting each corner is I want to support around the edge. Make sure your block isn't going underneath your actual cut so you're not cutting through your piece and the block underneath. But I want to support this edge so that way I know that there's not going to be any weird shifting once we get to the end of our cut and then we have a break and we have an ugly spot on the top side of our table. Remember, this is still the bottom side, so our good side is underneath. We want to preserve that. So there we are, nice and supported. I'm going to start a V cut here and knock this little section out so that way we're nice and straight when we start getting around our curve. And I'm gonna take this cut nice and slow. One of the problems with these jigsaws, the blades are so thin that they like to flex when you're forcing your cut and running it too fast. It'll start curling in on itself underneath. By going nice and slow, you ensure that it is actually cutting all the way through on every single stroke, and you end up with a perfectly nice 90-degree line all the way around. Let's cut this out. We're gonna stay towards the outside of our cut that we did with our router, and then we'll come back and we'll clean that up after we get rid of these scraps. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Like I said, there's no stress or pull on any of this. Once you get through, your piece should just break off nice and neat. You can lift it up and you can carry it away. When you guys are using these jigsaws, just remember, let the saw do the work for you. If you ever feel like you're having to force it, or if you feel like the tool's jumping around and biting in a weird way that it shouldn't, understand that there's probably something wrong. You need to check your tool, you need to check your cut, make sure everything's going the way that you plan. Then at this stage, you've really got one of two options for cleaning everything up. If you have a router bit that's a flush trim bit with a top bearing, you can go ahead and leave the table as is, set your bearing flush to your good cut on the top side here, and use that router bit to trim off the bottom half. Remember, we only cut halfway through with our bit the first pass around. I have a bottom bearing flush trim bit, so I actually need to flip the table and cut it from the top side so that the bearing is riding along the bottom side of the cut. So we've got our circle template cut out. I flipped the table so that my bottom bearing flush trim bit can come in and ride just along the bottom side of our good cut, removing the top side of this that you can see is way off. I've got this bearing set to where it runs about 1/4 inch above the very bottom base, so that way I know it's not going to slip underneath the cut, it's not going to do anything weird and catch a snag halfway up. Just ride perfectly right along the outside of that cut, and you want to run counterclockwise to your table. I had to do a little, you count this way, but counterclockwise is against, like you're countering. I don't really understand all of the terminology. I'm not a veterinarian. But let's go ahead and clean up our cut so we can make sure everything on the diameter of our table is good and we can start working on our full sanding process. And there it is. Everything feels nice and neat. Of course, we need to sand around this edge to clean it up. But I'm going to put 1/4 inch round over on the top, along with a 30-degree bevel, on the bottom. So there's really not much left. There's only going to be about 1/2 inch of this outside edge showing when we're finished with the table. Let's go ahead and get our roundover bit installed into our router. We'll go ahead and get the roundover cut all the way around so that when we're sanding, it'll leave us with a nice, really clean profile on our top edge. Right after I spend about 6 hours cleaning up all this sawdust. One more quick one before I get on to the edge profile. I've got this nasty spot here where there used to be a knot and that chipped out, so I'm going to fill this with clear so it'll be nice and smooth. And by going ahead and doing it now before I do my round over, it's actually going to stabilize that wood right there and ensure that it's not going to chip out further than what it is. Remember, it's wood, it's never perfect. There's something new you have to handle on every single project that you do. This is one of the spots we have to handle on this one. So I'm going to hold my saw blade right up here to the edge, and I'm going to fill some of this with our CA glue. Give it a little spray. Let that set up for just a second. This isn't going to cure it all the way through. The activator usually only gets kind of the top layer there. But once it's set up a little, we can go ahead and peel that off, hit the side with our activator, and then we're just going to let this sit and set up for about 15 minutes while we address some of the other knots on the table. I'll go ahead and do this now so that this way it's got time to set up around the edge before we actually do our profile. Now we just need to sand around the outside to get these spots that we hit with CA glue to ensure that our router sits nice and flush as we're working around our edge profile. And now with that shaped up nice and neat, we're ready to put our 1/4 inch round over around the top. I'm going to go ahead and start on this far side here so that I can do one continuous cut all the way around. There you have it. There's a 1/4 inch round over on the top. Now, we're going to do a 30-degree chamfer on the bottom, but I'm actually going to wait until after we do our final step, and you'll see what I'm talking about further on in the video. There's a reason why I don't want to cut that chamfer right now. If I were to just stain and finish this table with an oil-based polyurethane like I typically would on a hard pine table, then I would go ahead and cut that chamfer now. But let's hang on to that step for later on in the video. We're ready to start sanding the top side of this down now that we have our round over established. Now, be sure to use your due diligence. Don't skip any steps. Every single step is crucial. There's a lot of science involved with not skipping grits with your sandpaper. I prefer to use this Cubitron 3. I've gone through all sorts of different kinds of sandpaper throughout my career, and this is by far the best paper that I've found. But we're gonna work through 80, 120, and then finish off with 150. I'm gonna take the top to 120, I'm gonna flip it, and you'll see why I wait to hit the 150 until the very end. So let's start everybody's favorite chore. We're gonna put our 80 grit on the sander here. Get our vacuum fired up, and then we're ready to go. There's our 80 grit. So I just did 2 passes going across the grain. I'm gonna follow that up with one nice slow pass with our 80 grit with the grain, following the grain throughout the entire piece, hitting every single nook and cranny, and then we'll switch to our 120 grit and finish off going with the grain with it as well. We only need one real good slow pass with the 120. Just like carving a surfboard, unless you carve surfboards, in which case I'm from Indiana. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I went ahead and hit our round over and all of our edges with a 120 grit pad. I like to hand sand all of my edges so that I'm not left with any weird swirl marks. If you can't hold a sander flat, you should really just get used to hand sanding. Now I'm gonna switch to my 120 grit on my sander, get the top hit with 120, flip it, and we'll work on the bottom. So that's our 120 grit. We did one nice, even, slow pass. Use very light pressure on your sander. Make sure you're keeping an eye out. Like there was a little spot here that I noticed needed just a little bit more love, so I paid a little more attention to this spot that's over here. Make sure you pay attention to everything the whole time. While you're moving so slow with that sander, your eyes should also be scanning, 3 or 4 inches around it, making sure that you see any discrepancies, anything that you might need to go over twice. Make sure you find all of it at this early sanding stage, because once we move on to the 150, you're not going to be able to get rid of stuff like that. Now we're going to stop at 120. We're going to save the 150 for later on. Like I said, I'll explain to you why we're doing that when we get to that step. But let's go ahead and flip this over and start back at our 80 grit again on the bottom. All right, here's our bottom side. I'm not going to bore you guys with the sanding on this side. You already know what we're doing on the other side. I'm going to hit this with an 80 grit, 120, 150. We're going to water pop, hit 150 again, and then we're ready to start staining. If you don't understand what water popping is, I want you to pay attention to this next step. We sanded with our 80 grit, our 120, our 150 on the orbital sander. Now what I'm going to do is give this a good little dusting, and I'm going to come through with a wet rag, and I'm going to wipe down the entire surface here. It doesn't need to be soaking wet. You just need to make sure that you are getting all of the wood on the surface wet. What this is gonna do, as you're sanding and as you're going down to as fine as 150 grit, picture all of these wood fibers as being little straws, and none of these are ever running just perfectly perpendicular to where you're gonna meet the top of that straw. Most of the time they're setting up at an angle like this. Well, when you sand those down, you're running over and you're forcing those down into themselves. By hitting this with a little bit of water, you cause those to absorb a little bit, they swell up, and they stand back up. And you'll actually get little wood fibers sticking up through here. So once this dries out, we can come through by hand with 150 grit paper, sand it with the grain, and it'll knock all of those fibers off so that when you stain this, it'll stay as smooth as possible. It might not be perfect, but it'll be fairly close. With all of our sanding complete, on the bottom side of our table now first, we're gonna finish the bottom before we finish the top, and you'll see why. I'm gonna use this water-based True Black Minwax stain. This isn't poly shades. You don't want to use poly shades because poly shades you can't put epoxy on, it won't bond to it. The best thing that I have found to use is this water base. It dries very quick, so our setup time is only going to be one night as opposed to using an oil-based poly, in which case we're going to have to let that dry 3 to 7 days to be completely cured to be able to pour our tabletop epoxy on it. I'm trying to come in here tomorrow afternoon and pour the first coat of epoxy on the top. Now, in order to do that, we need to stain the bottom, we need to stain the top. We're gonna let that sit overnight. First thing in the morning, I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna put a coat of poly on the bottom. I'm gonna let that sit and set up for about 4 to 5 hours, and then we're gonna flip it, and I'm gonna do my first coat of epoxy on the top side of the table. I honestly think what this stuff is really watered down black vinyl paint. Not 100% certain. I'm sure if somebody from Minwax reaches out, they're going to correct me. They're going to tell me they put some scientific name product into this. But I know it's not alcohol based, and I know it's not oil based, it's water based. And I've thinned down acrylic paints to use for my projects to make colored stains before. This stuff seems really similar. With your stain mixed up, go ahead and take one of your fresh, clean rags, fold it over a few times like this. We're going to use this as an applicator, but we're going to dip into our finish here. And once you get started, so you know, you have to be really quick with this. It starts setting up within 2 minutes. So we need to apply this nice and even with the grain. Make sure everything is completely coated, and then we're going to come back in immediately and remove all of the excess with our other cloth. It's not like an oil base where you can let it sit and penetrate. This sets more on the surface. It does soak into the wood fibers, but it's got a really fast cure time. You don't want it to start setting up on you. So let's go ahead and start getting coated. I'm actually going to step over to this far side and do the far side first. I apologize that my back is to the camera. I apologize if I cut off any of this while I'm doing the start of this table, but I need to be quick and I need to work. There we go, nice uniform finish there. I'm gonna come through with my dry rag now, starting on the side that we started on, so we're keeping all the times uniform. And I'm just gonna wipe with the grain. Right like that. And then we're gonna let this sit and set up for about an hour now. We'll flip it over and then we'll hit the top side. and we'll hit around the perimeter of our table. I know. You're like, but man, I thought we were done with sanding. That's the best part. I'm so glad we get to do more. Listen, if I have to go through it one more time, you guys can go through it one more time. Now we water pop the top. Remember, we haven't stained our edges yet. Go ahead and wrap around those. We don't skip any steps. Right like that, we're gonna let this dry for about 10 minutes again, come back and hit it with our sanding sponge, and then we're ready to stain the top. Okay, now hear me out. The good thing about this water-based finish is it dries really fast. The bad thing about this water-based finish is it dries really fast. So, to combat this, the rag worked for the bottom. It turned out great, but I want it to be even quicker on the top. So I actually ran and grabbed an applicator pad that's meant for water-based stains. And we're gonna use the applicator pad to apply the stain to the top and then use a rag again to remove our excess stain. So again, we've got a clean rag here. I'm gonna go ahead and put my gloves on. And just like last time, I'm gonna hit the side that's closest to you guys first. That way, as I finish up, I'm back here on the back side of the table and you can actually see how the finish is gonna come out. So let's pour some of this into our paint tray. And I'm not really worried about getting too much in my tray because this is probably one of the few projects I'm going to use this stain on. Close our can up. And I think I'm going to try and split this up into two halves. I'm going to hit this side first. I'm going to wipe it down. And then I'm going to hit this side and wipe it down. And I'm going to use a natural line right where this seam is, where two of our boards are joined. That's where I'm going to cut it off. That way, if you have an overlapping section or any discrepancy, it's along a natural seam of the wood. So let me step over here. I might be in front of the camera again. I apologize in advance for that. Like I said, I need to be as quick as I possibly can with this stuff. There we go. I'm actually going to go ahead and hit this other side since it's going so quick here. I like this technique a lot more. When you're doing your table, do it this way. There we go. I'm going to wipe this off and then I'll go through and do our outside edge. Excellent. I like it. Now let's go through and hit around the outside here. And to do that, I'm going to kind of do our first technique combined with our second technique. I'm going to put it on a spot with a rag so it's wet, and then I'm immediately going to come back through with our dry rag and pull it back off. We did it. We've got a black table now. We've got a black stained top, which is going to look awesome with our two-tone black painted base. We're going to have that awesome dark two-tone black look to this table. Remember, we're not worried about our bottom edge here because we haven't finished it out yet. I will show you why we're waiting to finish that out once we do our epoxy pour and it has set up. So make sure you keep watching to the end. We haven't even done the best part of this table yet. I'm going to get these gloves off now and get myself all cleaned up. We'll let this set overnight so that it can completely set up. And in the morning, we'll come in, flip the table over, make sure we're doing something to protect the top while it's resting on the blocks. We don't want to have to worry about our top before we actually have our finish on it. But we're going to flip it. We'll get our polyurethane applied to the bottom, give that about 5 or 6 hours to set up and harden a little bit. flip it again, and do our first coat of epoxy on the top. I'll see you guys back here tomorrow. Now that our top and bottom stain has dried, I'm gonna go ahead and put an oil-based poly on the bottom side here. Our epoxy isn't actually gonna touch the poly. The oil-based poly is compatible with the epoxy, but we're keeping the two separate either way. I don't need a tabletop epoxy on the bottom, so the oil-based poly is what we're gonna seal it with. With this stuff, you just wanna apply it with the grain. You don't want too much sitting on the surface, but you also don't want to be dry brushing this stuff on. So just pick a spot to start. I'm going to say right here. And you can see this is really going to darken up that black stain. When you get to the edges, I always like to do the brush out towards the edge, so that way if you do it towards, you're going to be running drips down the side. And I'd like to try and keep this poly completely off the sides when we do our enamel. That's actually going to seal the sides of the table. We've got one coat of our oil-based poly applied here. I'm gonna go ahead and seal up this can. I'm gonna let this one coat set for about 6 hours, and then we're gonna flip it so we can start messing with our pour over epoxy on the top. Now, this isn't gonna be completely cured in 6 hours. As a matter of fact, it's not even gonna be completely cured tomorrow. However, we still need to do our chamfer around the bottom edge. We still need to cut in our C-channels into this. Those haven't come in the mail yet. With it being the holidays, it's almost Christmas. Everything shipping-wise has been pushed back. So we're gonna get the tabletop epoxy poured. Then we're gonna finish our profile around the bottom side. We're gonna install our C-channels, and then this tabletop will be finished after that process. So let's let this seal coat set up for a while so we can flip it and start working on the other side. That way we've got a seal on both sides. You don't want to leave one side exposed. Otherwise, you're going to have humidity coming out of one side of the piece and not the other side, and it's going to introduce some cupping. And that's the absolute last thing we want after we just sank so much time into this tabletop. I'm gonna leave you guys here for a while. Keep an eye on this table for me. I'm gonna go do some Christmas shopping. Now we're ready to do the epoxy on our tabletop here. First, we need to check and ensure that everything is completely level, that it's nice and solid. It's not really gonna move anywhere. So we check level this way. If you need to shim the blocks that are underneath your table, use shims to bring either side up. Go ahead and check. Rotate 90 degrees, check your level this way. And then I like to also go ahead and hit a 45 and check your level on either side here. I've already leveled this, so I already know that we're good to go. Let's get to mixing up our epoxy. Let's go ahead and get our nitrile gloves on here. You don't want to get this stuff all over your skin. If you can imagine, once you mix it, it starts setting up within a few minutes. And I don't know if you've ever messed with super glue in your life, but imagine having it all over every single one of your fingers. So we're going to mix up 32 ounces. It's one coat. This is going to be our seal coat for the top and for the sides around the edge of our table. I'm going to mix up 16 ounces in each one of these containers, and then I'm going to pour them together into this container and give it a second mixing. You want about a good 4 to 5 minutes of mixing to ensure that everything is properly mixed, that you're not leaving any hardener that's separated. And when you get everything on your tabletop, it's all going to smooth out. It's all going to be even. You're not going to have weird, blotchy, soft spots from it not being mixed properly. So let's go ahead with Part A, I've got this super clear tabletop epoxy. And we're gonna do 8 ounces in each one of our cups. Come on, Stringy. Okay, there's 8 ounces of part A. And then we're gonna do 8 ounces of part B. This is the actual hardener. And this is what's gonna activate our mix. So we'll bring this line up to the 16 ounce. Right like that. Go ahead and cap these both off. We'll take our paint stick. Make sure you're completely clear of any sawdust that might be on this. Go ahead and start mixing. And slow is better when you're mixing this stuff. You see guys mixing big, huge batches with a drill, and that's fine because it's a big, huge batch. But when we're doing something this small, you want to let the two actually blend together as you're stirring. Once you get to a certain point, you can start scraping all of your sides, scraping the bottom. Make sure you don't leave any of it separated. Try to be as thorough as you possibly can. And we'll just skip to a quick time lapse of me stirring here so we don't have a 5-minute mixing montage. Now with both of your containers mixed separately, we're going to mix them together in this bigger container. I chose this container because by the time we get up to our 32 ounce line, it's actually going to be spread out wider than it is tall, and this will help ensure that less of it gets stuck to the sides. You'll see as we're pouring, I'm going to point this out. When you do your first initial pour, you want that to be all that you put on it. Don't come back later afterwards and think you need a little bit more and start scraping the sides, because you're going to have part A or part B stuck to the side. You're going to pour that in a section, and then that's going to be sitting there unmixed, and you're going to end up with a soft spot on your tabletop. So let's get both of these poured into here, give it another good mix, and we'll be ready to pour the table. Try and get as much of this out of here as you possibly can so we know we're not leaving anything behind. When they say 1-to-1 mixture, they're dead serious. You don't really want to be off of either one of your parts. There we go. I believe I've gotten about 98% out of each one of these containers. We'll set those to the side, let those dry together, and pitch them after they're dry. But now let's go ahead and give our other bucket about 2 minutes worth of stirring here. Remember, go ahead and scrape the bottom, scrape the sides, try and get everything as thoroughly mixed in as you possibly can. I believe that's mixed properly now. This is the first time I've actually done a 2-coat system on a tabletop like this. I've poured epoxy before. I've used epoxy for various small projects. This is one of the largest pieces I've done, and it's the first time that I've actually used it for a seal coat. So this might be way too much. It might not be enough. Let's go ahead and pour it on top of here. We'll spread it around with our Bondo spreader, and we'll see just exactly how it comes out. There we go. You can see we covered most of the table already, so I'm gonna come in here and start spreading this out. Let me scoot my stool out of the way so I can get up here close and personal. You want to make sure to hit everything so that it can really penetrate down into the pores of the wood. Use your spatula to actually spread everything out and move it around. We're not going to quite go over the edge yet. We want to make sure that everything gets completely coated. That way it can all soak into the wood fiber evenly. And I'll just leave it about an inch from the edge. Now that we've gone all the way to the edge, we can actually start running some of it over our edge and working some of this off of our tabletop. We want to try and make sure we've got a nice consistent layer all the way across. This stuff is self-leveling, but it's also not perfect. We're just going to let this drip right over the edge. Anything that goes over, we've got plastic laid out to catch it. Give this a couple good passes. If you keep an angle on your spreader, like I am here, it'll push it all towards the front side. And then I'm gonna come through afterwards with my rubber glove with my hand and just make sure it's wet all the way around the entire outside. That way, as this continues to self-level and drip off, it's gonna flow evenly around the outside and not leave you with some dry spots. And at this point, you want to make sure that your room is nice and dust-free. Don't be doing anything out here for about 6 hours so that this can set up. Once it gets tacky, anything you do is just going to set on the top of it while it finishes and cures. But for that first 5 to 6 hours, make sure you're out of the shop, out of the way, leave this alone. But right now, we've got about 20 minutes that we can still mess with this. I'm gonna hit it with a torch. There's all kinds of bubbles down in here, and our heat source is gonna eliminate any of those bubbles. I'll show you what I mean right here. I just hit all of it nice and evenly. Don't let it sit anywhere for too long. You don't want to scorch your epoxy. And with that, we're going to let this sit for about 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, if you have any other bubbles that rise, you can go ahead and pop those. This isn't too bad because remember we used that water-based stain, and that's going to actually act as a really mild sealer to this wood before we put this first coat on. But after 10 minutes, we can come back and pop any bubbles that we have, and that's the last time you can touch this. Whether you see a fisheye, whether you see a bubble, no matter what, don't touch it again until you have a final cure. I wanted to show you guys something cool here. So with our Bondo scraper or squeegee, whatever you'd like to call it, since it's flexible and since it's made out of this rubbery plastic material, the Bondo doesn't actually stick to it. So if you use the Bondo squeegees, at least we know that this is reusable. Our bucket and stirring stick, not so much. So you're going to have to get a second one to do this next pour. But before we start the next pour, I need to go through and sand this tabletop down. Now, we're only doing a light scuff. I don't need it taken all the way back down to the bare wood again. Remember, this is stained. And even though this went through and sealed a lot of our pores, I need a nice little base coat for our sticker and our decals and everything to stick to before I pour on the second coat. So I've got a 320 grit sandpaper on here. Around the edges, I'm going to hit it with this 400 grit sanding block. We need to make sure to scuff up all the sides. We need to get the round over. I've got a few dimples and whatnot in the round over. That's expected. There's a little bit of dust in the top. That's expected. All of that's going to sand out and lay flat, and it should be nice and neat and clean when we get ready to hit our second layer. So let me go ahead and get this sanded up so I can get the decals on and we can get ready for that. There we go. We've hit the top now with that 320 grit paper on the orbital sander. You're probably going to have a panic attack when you start hitting this because it looks like you're ruining your tabletop. But it's one of those things where you really just have to trust the process. Now we're going to come back in with this 400 grit sanding block. If I could have found a 320 in a sanding block, I'd have used that. 400 is what they had. Let's go through and hit all of our roundovers. You're going to do this fairly light. All we're trying to do is get rid of any of those fibers that pulled up in our initial seal coat, any dust that might have collected around the edge. We're just kind of smoothing all of that out. Let's come through and clean up all this dust. We don't want any of this dust left on the top when we go to pour our next coat or when we go to stick our decals, because right now our decals aren't going to stick to this dust whatsoever. Now, Super Clear recommends at least a 90% alcohol mixture. I went ahead and got 91% just to be safe. I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to hit it once with this rag, with the alcohol nice and wet on here. Make sure you get all your sides. Then I'm going to come through with a second dry rag and I'm going to hit it again. That is clean. Let's let this set up for a few minutes here and completely dry, and we'll go ahead and apply our decals. We've got our decals applied. Now, I'm not 100% certain that the epoxy is going to stick to this decal. This is the first time I'm doing this, and I'm not entirely convinced that it's not the first time it's been done. I don't know. I haven't seen another, reference myself. We're going to pour it. We're going to hope for the best. I think everything being sealed around the outside will make the center of this perfectly fine. We won't really know until it's set up and it's finished. But let's go ahead. I'm going to mix up 3 containers of 16 ounces this time. and mix them into this larger 5-quart container. Then we'll pour, we'll spread, and leave it alone for 72 hours. Again, mix each one of these for about 2 minutes. Then we're going to dump all 3 of them into our big container and stir that for about another 3 minutes. Scrape the sides, scrape the bottoms, get everything that you possibly can into this large bucket so that we can ensure it's an equal mixture, that all 3 of these are mixed together and we don't have any soft spots in our final coat here. Once you start mixing this, you want to have everything planned out beforehand so that you know that you're not letting this sit in the bucket for too long. There's this weird scientific term, it's a physics thing, where if you leave this in a larger portion as opposed to thinned out across a piece, while it's sitting together in this larger pool, it'll actually get hotter and it'll start to set up quicker. And it'll give it a flash cure and it'll start curing in the bucket before you can even get it on the tabletop. So let's go ahead and just get this poured here. Again, we're not scraping the sides onto the table or, doing something funky to get the last drop out of this. Whatever's left on the sides or the bottom, leave it in this bucket and throw it away. That's going to prevent you from getting any soft spots in your top from it being unmixed. I've got this square notch scraper here, and I'm going to use the 1/8 inch and see how well that spreads. And this time around, I'm actually going to put some of this around the outside edge before I scrape this over. I think that's really going to help keep us from having any kind of weird malformities around the edge of our table. So I'm going to take my fingers, I'm going to dip them into the epoxy here, and I'm just going to smear some of this around the outside edge. And now on these last few final passes, you just want to make sure that you always keep it angled towards yourself. Keep that epoxy pulling towards yourself. That way we know that it's all coming off. We're leaving our 1/8 inch gap, so we know that we're going to have the same exact amount of epoxy on every square inch and not end up with any funky thick spots throughout our table. Whatever pulls off the edge, pulls off the edge. Right like that. We're going to hit it with the torch, get rid of any little micro bubbles that we have. We'll let that sit for 10 minutes, hit it with the torch again, and then leave that alone for 72 hours. Don't come near it, don't touch it, don't look at it, don't get dust on it or around it. Leave it completely still for 72 hours. The top has had 3 coats on it total. I know I showed 2 coats on camera, but it needed one more just nice little thin skim coat to finish off the top. Now we have all these drips around the outside where we let that flood coat just drip over the sides. I'm going to go through with a multi-tool and trim all these off, and then come back in with the orbital sander and sand them all down flush. Then we can cut our chamfer, we can get our stain and blend everything back in, put our last coat of sealer on the bottom of it, get our C-channels installed in the bottom of it so that we have some nice support underneath, and then we'll get on to making the base later on in the video. But let me show you the process of getting rid of all these nasty bumps that you see around the outside here. So you're going to hold your blade just nice and flush with the bottom of the table. That way you're not gouging into your wood at all. We're just trying to skim nice and, even with the plane of our tabletop. If you leave a little bit of the bumps left over, that's perfectly fine. You're going to come back in with a sander to flatten them all out. So that way the router's not catching anything and throwing our chamfered bottom edge off as we're going around the table. This is the chamfer bit that I've got installed in the router right now. I'm going to set this for about half depth. That way I can go through and make 2 passes to get to my final depth, which is going to be 7/16 of an inch. I'm not sure how well you can hear me with the mask on, but with all this dust in here, I don't really want to take it off yet. Let me show you what I'm talking about and you'll see. We're going to cut halfway down, and then I'm going to drop this down to the full cut and finish it off. So there we go. As I said, our first pass cuts about halfway down through our final depth. And then we're just going to unlock our router here and go ahead and run it down to the depth that we want. And I'm going to go a little closer to that 1/2 inch instead of the 7/16, just a little bit on the shy side of what this bit can actually do. I think it's going to look really clean with our 1/4 inch round over on the top and then the 1/2 inch bevel on the bottom. Chamfer, bevel, beveled, chamfer. Let's get this done here. Boy, that tool likes to make a mess, doesn't it? Now we've got our 1/2 inch 45-degree chamfer all the way around the outside. I believe that earlier in the video I might have said that I was going to do a 30-degree, but I switched it up on this one and went with the 45. I think it's going to look really clean on this round table. It's going to give us that almost diamond cut appearance to our reveal on our edge on our tabletop here. Guys, you won't hear me brag about, particular tools or materials or things like that on this channel very often. I don't have any sponsors. We're too small for that at this point. Something I'll pursue further down the road. But honestly, I've used so many different brands of these steel C-channels here. And this Blulu brand that I order off of Amazon is by far my favorite. The cost effectiveness of it is just spot on. It's worth every single penny. They're made amazingly. They're powder coated. They are slotted. The reason that these are slotted and they're not just holes, I've seen C-channels where they just drill holes and you put your screws in, and you would think in theory that everything holds it nice and tight. The reason these are slotted is because you want to leave your screws just a little loose. I usually go hand tight plus maybe 1/8 of a turn. That way, as your wood expands and contracts throughout the seasons, it allows your screw to move back and forth through these slots, and it'll just hold your steel flush inside the routing you have underneath your table. These are amazing C-channels. I recommend them to everyone. If you're not using any kind of a table skirt underneath your table, which this one is not, I highly recommend installing these into the bottom of your tabletop. To trim the fat a little bit, I'm sure there's plenty of videos that you can see on how to install these into the bottom of a table. I'm gonna go ahead and cut these in, and then we'll come back and finish up with our finishing process. All right, so now I've got the routing for my C-channel on the underside of this table. I'm gonna follow up this outside edge with my 120 and my 150 grit. We used 80 to take down all of our drips. Now we need to follow that up and make sure that everything is the same grit that we finished the rest of the table with. Then we'll come back through with some stain and touch all this up here. Let's give it a good brooming here, get rid of whatever big dust we can. Okay, now to blend in all of the edges around here, I've switched to blue nitrile gloves, and that's a really important step because, not really, but now that I've got your attention, the color of your gloves doesn't really matter. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in with two separate cloths. I'm gonna have a wet cloth, I'm gonna have a dry cloth. And for the blending, I'm just gonna do small sections at a time. I'm gonna pick about a 6 to 12 inch section. I'm gonna work some of that stain into it. And then I'm gonna take my dry cloth and I'm gonna pull it back out and kind of swirl that around and blend that into what we already have here on our good section that we didn't sand. And you'll see how nice and neat all of that looks. Go ahead and hit around your chamfer, around the edge. Try not to get onto the epoxy. Any of this stain that gets on the epoxy should wipe off nice and clean. You shouldn't have to worry about it too much, but it's best to just avoid problems and situations than it is to have to correct them. Start over on this far side. We're just gonna work that in and kind of blend it right on into the other side here. Get our chamfered edge. Make sure that soaks in nice and neat. And then we'll come immediately in with our dry rag and pull it right back off. And remember, we did 2 coats on this the first time. If we do this correctly, we should be back around here to the start by the time that this actually starts drying. We'll be able to get our second coat blended in almost immediately. All right, there's one coat all the way around. Let's go ahead and get a second and see if this will lay on here just the way we want it to. Now, it's really imperative with this second coat that we try and wipe off with the grain. Once we get our poly on here, it should blend nice and neat with what we originally had. So those pulled back in nice and neat, blended everything back together. We've got our chamfer around our edge, so our profile around the entire tabletop is finished. We need to let this water-based stain set up for just a little while. I'm gonna let this set up for just a few hours here, and then we'll come back and we'll hit it with our oil-based poly. We'll get our C-channels installed once the poly is set up. The next time you see me, I'm gonna be in here working on the table base because we need to get that going, start working on our paint time with the base itself, so that way we can get this rolled out the door and get on to the next project. So now that the finish is completely set up, everything is done with our tabletop, I forgot about the one special element of this table that's really gonna set it off, and that's some stainless steel cup holders that we're gonna install around the border of our tabletop. Now, to do this, I went ahead and marked out, cutting into a pie. I've got my 8 sides here. So I did a plus in the center that's square, and then I did an X that's square. All of these are equally spaced. I went ahead and marked in 2.5 inches from the edge. That's gonna be the center for our hole saw that we're gonna use to cut these in with. Now, These are 2 3/4, so that's going to leave about a 1-inch space to the outside of our table. We want to keep that so that we know we have good integrity around the outside on the outside of the cup holders. But let me go ahead and take this hole saw. I've got blocks underneath 4 sides right now, and I'll slip those blocks underneath each one of these corner pieces as I drill those. That's going to keep the backside from splintering or splitting out. So we're just going to line up our drill bit with our center point, right like that. And the guide is going to go ahead and punch in about a 1/2 inch to make sure that you're staying nice and straight along your cut. And take this cut nice and slow. Once you're at this point, there's really no going back. So if you mess something up here, you've got either a complete start over or we've got a serious job to try and correct our mistake. Take your time, drill slow. Don't let it get too hot. If you feel like it's getting too hot, if it's starting to make a weird screech or a whine, back it back out, let it cool off, move on to a different hole, and come back to that one and finish it when it's cooled off. Had to switch to the corded drill. That cordless will do it, but man, it was getting hot. I want you to come in at about a 45-degree angle and just give this a really light touch all the way around all of these cup holders. This is to help break the edge, so as you're removing these stainless steel cup holders to wash them, you're not going to end up chipping anything or scratching anything. It'll just be nice and smooth to insert these and pull them back out. Look how awesome this is, guys. Of course, I need to get this out of the dusty shop now so I can actually clean it all up. But you're gonna go through, these are removable, and where we cut these out is bare wood now. So I'm gonna get some of my oil-based poly on a rag, and I'm just gonna wipe it around the inside of these to seal this wood up. That way, as condensation is building up on these, it's not just soaking into this wood, causing problems down the road. But for right now, I'm going to move this out of the shop so that we can get on to building our base. If you guys have followed along this far, then that really proves to me that you like the stuff that I'm making. You take value in the content that I provide here. I would really appreciate it if you would do me a massive favor. Like the video, go subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell and switch that to all so that you don't miss all of the future projects that we're going to be creating here on this channel. I try to be as value intensive as I possibly can because I want you guys to be able to make the things that I make. I want you to be able to run a business just like I do, and I want you to get out of your 9 to 5 and into your own workflow, your own income, be able to provide for your family yourself just like I do here. Now, with that out of the way, we need to start working on what we're going to use for our table base. I really like the bases that I've made before. I'll put a couple pictures of them up here so that you can see what I'm talking about. It's got a nice center post for stability, and then we've got angled cuts that form kind of an X pattern that really helps with not having any kind of side-to-side sway. You've got support on all sides of the table. It's really perfect for these round table shapes. Now, the first thing you need to determine is how tall you're going to make your table. Typical table height is going to be 30 inches. If you're making something that's a cabinet height, a countertop height, that's going to be 32. We're going to stick with 30 inch for this. Since it's a poker table, it's going to be in a garage. And by using this 4x4 stock here, it's going to keep our cost fairly reasonable, and it's still going to give us a lot of support, a lot of value, but we need to know the exact measurements of all of the materials that we're using. This 4x4 actually comes down to being 3.5 by 3.5. That's going to be really important because our base uses a top section that's horizontal, a bottom section that's horizontal, and a center post. So if you remember, the top of our table is 1.25 inches thick. Our posts are 3.5 inches wide, so we need to double this up to 7 inches plus our top, which is going to be 8.25. So we take our 30 minus our 8.25, and that's going to tell us that we need 21.75 inches for our center post. I went ahead and grabbed plenty of this 4x4 material, so let's get over to the miter station and we'll go ahead and get these all cut up. Now the first cut that we need to make is our 21.75 for our center post. I've already cut this side off, so I know this is a perfect 90 degrees. I'm going to come out and mark our 21.75 inches. Put a mark right on the line, and when you cut this, make sure you're not cutting directly center on your line. You don't want to be 1/16 of an inch off or 1/8 of an inch off with the kerf of your blade. Keep that carbide to the right of your line or to the left, depending on which side you're keeping. In my case, I'm keeping this left side. I'm going to keep the carbide just on the right side, flush with this line. And then I know that my measurement is completely precise and completely accurate. With our table width being 48 inches, I'm actually going to go with a 30-inch wide base. And in order to accomplish this, I want to do a couple different things. First, I'm going to mark 30.5, and I'm going to make a cut. Now with our good square side, we're going to flip our stock around here, and we're going to come to our final 30-inch width. Follow this cut up 3 more times, so we've got 4 of these. And if you want to double check your measurements, now is the perfect time to do so. Remember, we've got our cross that we're putting on the bottom, we've got our cross that we're putting on the top, and then we've got our center post. If we put all those together and take a quick measurement, that's going to give us 28.75 plus the 1.25 inch top will set right at our 30-inch height. The way that I want to bring these crosses together, maybe one of you guys know, and you can let me know down in the comments below. There's tons of different lap joints out there. I know this isn't a half lap. I believe a half lap joins the ends of 2 boards, right? Maybe this is a full lap. But basically, I want to join these together this way here. And to do this, I'm going to put a notch in one board going halfway down, a notch in the top board going halfway up. These will sandwich together perfectly. We can glue it, clamp it, throw a screw in it. When we put our center post on, you won't see our screws. Everything will be hidden. It'll be nice and neat, nice and clean. Now, in order to do this, I need to first find the center of both of these boards. So if you remember, we've got our 30-inch width. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark at 15. Make sure you lose your square so that you have to hunt all around your shop and look for it like I do. Set both of our ends flush, and then we know that if we mark right across here, we're going to be dead even on both sides. And if we know that our width is 3.5 inches on these, then we should be able to come 1.75 inches off each side and make a right mark and a left mark. And what I like to do to ensure that these are entirely tight is I'll actually come just a hair shy of the 1.75 inches that we need. That way, when I make the cuts, I can kind of sneak up and fit these together in a couple dry tests to make sure that everything is as tight as we can get it. We don't want any kind of slop. So I'm gonna first make a mark on the right side at our 1 3/4. I'm gonna come around to the left side and make another mark at our 1 3/4. We'll follow that up by carrying it on to both pieces. And then we can use this first one that we laid out to go ahead and mark templates on our other two. Now we know the pieces we need to cut out. Let's head back to the miter saw, and I'm going to show you how to set it up to ensure that all of these are going to set together nice and flush. Everything's going to be plumb and level. It takes a lot to get set up at first, but once you figure it out, once you know how to do this, you'll be able to knock these table bases out all day long. Back over here at the miter saw, we need to do a couple things to prepare for this cut. First, I'm going to attach a piece of 4x4 stock. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to bring our cut forward. With the blade being round, we don't want it back against the back of our fence. Otherwise, when we go to cut our slots, the back side of that cut is going to be curved up. We want this to be to where the flat part of the blade is actually behind the material that you're cutting. Now with that installed, we're going to flip down our catch here. This is for our depth stop on our blade, and we need to figure out exactly how deep we need to be. We know that these are 3.5 inches wide, and we want to come halfway through that, so that's going to set us right at 1 3/4 inches deep on our depth stop. There's multiple different ways to get this measurement. I really like the spacers that you can use to completely perfectly mark this out, but unfortunately, I don't have a set of those spacers, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take my tape measure, I'm going to come down and bottom out against my depth stop, and I'm just going to check and see what depth I left this at last time. I've got 1 1/8 inches, so I need to come up a little bit with my blade, which is going to involve turning this set screw out. And double check this a few times. Make sure that your measurement is dead on. We want to be as perfect and as accurate with this cut as we possibly can so that we know that when these set together, they're going to set nice and flush with each other. There we go. There's our 1 3/4 that we're looking for. This saw in particular has a little wing nut that we use to set our depth. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up. And after you tighten it up, go ahead and check it one more time. Make sure everything's good. I'm going to make a little channel cut in our back piece here. That way my dust collection hopefully will be able to catch some of the sawdust as we're cutting this out. We're really going to make a lot of sawdust with this, so I have to have my vacuum running. And I've got a little test block here, just a little scrap piece that I kept handy. So one thing I can do is go ahead and make a cut. And now you can double check to see if you are dead center on this and adjust up and down accordingly. It looks like I do need to come down just a hair. Again, we'll make another test cut right next to the one that we just made. There we go, and you can see this took a few test cuts to really nail it down. We got to our 1 3/4. These are always just a hair off from what they should exactly be. But by doing all of these test cuts, making our micro adjustments, you can make sure that you're dead center, dead perfect, And now we're ready to start making our actual cuts. I'm gonna try and show you this process as best as I can here. So we've got our right side, we've got our left side marked out. We need to empty everything that's in between. To do that, I'm gonna go ahead and make a cut down the right side. I'm gonna make a cut down the left side. And then we'll start making a series of cuts through the center just to remove as much material as possible. And then I'm actually gonna bottom this blade out, and I'm gonna slide our piece left and right as I move our blade front and back to make sure everything is level at the bottom of our cut. And now you're gonna start making your left to right sweeps across here to even all of this bottom plane out. There we go. You can see how nice and neat all of that is. We know that our walls are 90 degrees. And I'm not sure how well the camera will pick this up, but I actually stayed just a hair shy of our line. That's so when we get all 4 of our channels cut, we can start test fitting some of these pieces and then micro adjusting how far we bring this cut over so that everything is nice and snug. Let me go ahead and cut the channel in our 3 other pieces, and I'll meet you back over at the work table. One of the last thing I want to do with our pieces here before we actually join them is put a nice 45-degree chamfer on the edges of our pieces so that when our legs are on the ground, they're not just, sharp square edges on them. They've got a nice profile to them. I'm going to leave about an inch worth of a straight down here at the bottom. And then I've got my stop block set up so that I can just bring these up here, hit the cut, rotate it, hit the second cut, and be done with it. Move on to the next one. We're gonna do this for all 4 of our pieces for our table base. Now we need to get 8 of our angled supports cut. These are super easy. I'm going to show you how to do them here. Start out with a 45 on one end. And then we're just going to measure out 12 inches. Put a mark. Grab your square and extend that mark, and then come to your side and follow up where your square is on the corner. Right like that. Now you know where your cut's going to be on this side. You just want to make sure to stay on the side of your cut that you want to remove material from. In my case, that's on the left side here. So I'll do a few test cuts. And double check on the back side to make sure you're hitting your line. In my case, I need to move a little bit. I like to go a little past where my line is and then bring that in and dial that cut down so I know all of these are exactly the same. And when they're sitting on the center post, it's going to leave a nice square profile all the way around where these meet together. There's that one there. We need to repeat this 7 more times. So now we've got all of our pieces for our base cut out. We've got our 8 angled supports. We've got the 4 pieces, 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom, and our center post. I need to sand all of these down, and since this is getting painted, it's actually going to be a pretty quick process. I've got an 80 grit on my sander here. Some of these faces are rougher than the others, so I'm going to go ahead and hit these faces with the 80, and then we'll come back through with 120 and hit all of the faces, hit all of the corners, and I'm going to show you a couple things that you can do to really tie this in and make this look like a complete table base and not just some scrap pieces that you threw together. Let me go ahead and knock out this 80 and I'll show you what I'm talking about. With all of the rough sanding out of the way, like I said, one edge on these was worse than all the others. I'm sure it's something to do with the milling process. I'm not too knowledgeable on all of that. I don't own a sawmill myself. But now that that 80 grit is out of the way, we're going to switch over to a 120. I'm going to hit all 4 sides. I'm going to round over all of the edges. And then on all 3 of these, there's one special thing I want you guys to do. I'll show you that while we're going through the sanding process. Let's start with our center post first. So I went ahead and sanded down all 4 of our sides, and I hit all 4 of the corners. Now what I want to do is on each end of this, I'm actually going to give a round over to all 4 of these corners on the ends here. That's it for the center post. Let's set that over to the side. We'll start moving on to our top and bottom edges here. These I'm going to hit all 4 sides. I'm going to hit all 4 of our long corners. I'm going to give a very slight round over, just enough to knock the edge off of these 45s here. But I'm going to put a round over on these bottom corners, and I'm also going to hit the very top corners of our pieces that are going to be joined. I don't want to bother with the sides or the bottom. But for these top corners where they come together, that's going to give a nice little round-overed meeting where those joints come together. Right like that, we hit the very top edges, like I said, of our joint here. We hit everything on each one of our ends, all 4 of the long sides, all 4 of the long corners. Repeat this for all 4 of your top and bottom pieces to your base. We need to move on to these 8 pieces here. And the way that I'm going to do these is I'm actually going to hit all 4 sides, all 4 of the long corners, along with the left and right faces on these 45-degree bevels here. The reason I'm doing all of these special roundovers is so that when these meet together, you can see it's not just going to be a 90-degree edge meeting a roundover. It's 2 roundovers coming in together. And you don't want to put a roundover on your top or bottom of your angle here because you want that to dive nice and neat to that center post. So let's go ahead and get all 8 of these sanded, then we're ready to start painting. There we go. All our pieces cut, all our pieces sanded. We're ready to paint these up and fit them together. I'm going to be using the Sherwin-Williams cabinet and furniture paint in a tricorn black. Tricorn black's going to be one of the darkest blacks that you can possibly get. Remember that name when you go to get the paint for yourself, so you can just walk in and say, hey, hand me a tricorn black and a semi-gloss finish. So I'm going to go ahead and paint 2 coats on this, assemble the base, and then we're going to have some holes that we need to touch up when we're finished. Assuming everybody here knows how to put paint on a brush, I'm going to go ahead and skip this next part so that I don't have to waste a whole lot of your guys' time. Alright, so stick with me, guys. We're in the final few stages here. We need to get our base all put together so that we can get our feet drilled into it, get our little Z-clip channels installed, and then we're ready to put this table together and get it out of the shop. The first step in building this table base is we need to make our crosses for the top and bottom. And if you remember when we made these, we fit them together over on the miter saw. I actually marked these as sets. I've got set A and I've got set B so that I know which two fit together perfectly, which ones we have already test fitted, and it's going to make it a lot simpler when we get down the road here to put it all together. So we don't leave any unnecessary dents. I'm going to use this block here to set my two pieces together. Right like that. I'm going to come in and countersink 2 screws into this to hold it together. And I'm using these 3-inch screws. We know that this is 3.5 inches thick, so we're not going to have to worry about it penetrating on the other side. Let's go ahead and get our second one put together here.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently.
Let's try this again. So I was going to leave this part out, but I believe in honesty and I believe in transparency. I don't believe that you should be on YouTube telling everyone that you're perfect, that you never mess up, you never make mistakes. Everything that you do while you're learning something new is about making mistakes and learning what not to do in the future. And when I was putting this other bottom section together before, it was a little tighter than it should have been. When I put the paint on the inside, it closed up that gap just a little bit too much. And when I was hammering it down, that put pressure on my boards and it split this piece. Now, I was going to edit that out and just move on and act like everything went together and it was all hunky-dory. But like I said, I feel like I need to be honest with you guys. I made a mistake. I rebuilt the entire bottom section, repainted the entire bottom section. So let's scrap this piece, let's put this one together, and we'll continue with our build of our base here. That one's gone. Now, just the same as the other side, we fit it together here like so. And then countersink 2 screws. Now, it's time to attach our center post, and in order to do this, I'm actually going to drill pocket holes into both sides of this so that we can attach it at the bottom and then attach our top section. To drill these pocket holes, I'm going to be using this Masca pocket hole jig. I'm going to provide a link to this jig down in the description below. I know a lot of guys use the Kreg jig, and the Kreg is perfectly fine. It does its job. My only problem is the durability of it and the longevity of it. It's made of plastic, like many of their products are. This one is billet aluminum, and I know that this is going to hold up a lot longer than the Kreg jig. Now, for my particular application, the actual pilot section comes off. We'll set this over to the side. Now, to attach this, I've got my depth set at 1.5 inches on my ruler here. So I'm going to hold that. I'm going to set this 1.5 inches from the end. And then I'm going to take a clamp, and I'm actually going to clamp it to the section that I'm drilling. Things would be a lot easier if I had 3 hands. So right like that, we've got our vacuum attached here, so that's going to get rid of any dust as we're drilling our pilot holes. We'll go ahead and get our vacuum turned on. I'm going to drill a left and a right hole using the outside guides here. And we're going to do this on both sides on both ends. There you go. I've got 2 holes on each side, on each end. And then to attach our center post, I'm going to come in with some 2-inch pocket hole screws. Make sure everything is centered, make sure everything is aligned. And then just run those down nice and snug. Be sure to double check everything, make sure you're happy with it. I like to put 1 in each side. That seems to pull everything nice and tight, and then you can run your second screws in. It keeps everything from cocking to one side or the other. There we go again. It's just one of those days apparently. Let's take this off, flip it, and put it on correctly because we've got this section upside down. If you ever get frustrated while you're in the shop working, just remember, sometimes it's best to walk away for a little while and do something else, come back with a fresh mind, instead of letting yourself get too frustrated, and then you end up making multiple mistakes like I just did. Anyways, now that we're setting correctly, let's get all this attached. And then we're gonna let gravity help us hold this piece while we attach it. The weight of this is gonna help keep it pushed down to the bottom section. We wanna double check that everything is aligned, right like that. And then we'll come through and attach our screws. Now to fill these pocket hole screws and make things really simple, I've actually got these pocket hole plugs. These are pre-cut specifically for filling pocket holes. I've got this Titebond Quick and Thick. I know some of you got something in common with that, right? Let's coat the end of our plug here. Press it into our hole. And give it just a little love tamp here. Alright, coffee in hand, it's time to get to the final steps here. I'm gonna pre-drill countersunk holes in all of these support pieces. I'm gonna get them all attached, get all of the holes plugged and filled, so when that dries we can sand it down and finish painting our last pieces here. And then we'll move on to the final couple finishing touches before our table's ready to be assembled inside the house. Alright, there's all our holes pre-drilled. I've got 2 holes on one side, 1 hole on the other. That's to keep from having any kind of twisting or anything over time. Coffee intake complete. Let's go ahead and start getting these put onto our table here. There we go, nice and neat. That does it for all of our support pieces. I'm gonna run out and grab some Bondo real quick because apparently I ran out here in the shop. So let me go grab that and I'll meet you guys back here at the table to show you how to mix that up and how to fill these holes so that they'll be ready to sand and paint within 15 or 20 minutes. Now guys, if you've never worked with Bondo before, I want you to seriously pay attention to this part because this is one of those tricks of the trade that you just pick up throughout the years. It's not really taught by a lot of guys. A lot of people don't really know it. It's huge in the trim area. I know Bondo is typically seen as an automotive product, but if you've ever spent any kind of time doing high-end custom trim, you've probably worked with Bondo throughout your life. And the technique that I like to use, I've got one of these little flat square razors that I wrapped in some blue tape, and this is going to give me a little more of a handle to hang on to. I wrap it about 12 times to give it some decent stability here. And the great part about this is you can scrape this clean and hang on to it, or they're cheap enough you can just pitch it whenever the job's done. Now I'm gonna get about a silver dollar size worth of Bondo here. And if you can see, the ratio for your mixing, this tiny little tube is supposed to last for this entire can of Bondo. So that tells you close to what your ratio needs to be. It doesn't take a lot of this hardener. What I'm gonna do is squeeze out a little bit on the top here, just enough to give it some color. And then you need to be fairly quick when you're working this stuff. You're just gonna kind of mix it all in nice and neat here. Make sure it's all fairly uniform. You don't want a lot of just the gray Bondo that's unmixed, because it's not going to set up and it's not going to harden. This stuff gives you a chemical reaction that actually heats up the drying process, and within about 10 minutes you're going to be ready to paint. Now I'm just going to fill every single one of these screw holes with this. Make sure they're a little bit over full so that way you can sand it back down to flush. There, we've got all of our holes filled. I'm gonna let these sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then they're gonna be ready to sand, and we'll get our 2 coats of paint on to match our paint job on the rest of the table base. Cool thing about having drying times is I ran in and caught a shower while this was setting up and curing here. Let's go ahead and get our Bondo sanded down so I can get 2 coats of paint on these bare edges here. And then this is going to be ready to throw feet on, get our Z-clips installed, and actually assemble the table so I can get you guys your final shots of the final product. Awesome, there we have everything finally completely sanded down. Let's get our last coats of paint on here and be wrapped up with this project. And there you have it. Now the paint is completely finished. Let's let this dry for a little while. We'll come back and put our feet on, put our Z-clips on. Now we're ready to install our adjustable feet. These are nice because depending on where you're gonna put this, whether it be a client's house, your house, in this case it's gonna go on a garage floor, you wanna be able to adjust the level of the table for one, and for two, even if your base is perfectly flat, that's not to ensure that the floor you're putting it on is perfectly flat. I install these in every single table that I build, and it ensures that the client can keep this table for 40 years if they'd like. If anything ever moves, it's just a quick tilt, adjustment of the foot, and set the table back in place. In order to install these, I've got a 1-inch paddle bit along with a 3/8 inch drill bit. What I'm gonna do is start with my 1-inch paddle bit. Since these are 1 inch around, they'll fit nice and neat into the hole. And this is also gonna give me my center guide for where I wanna put the depth adjustment for our insert piece. Let's switch gears here. I'm actually gonna use this 1-inch Forstner bit. This is gonna give me the depth that I need for my foot. As you can see, if I go to the end of this, that's going to allow just about 1/8 of an inch of penetration into the bottom of the table in case you need to zero one of these out. So I'm going to drill just to where the bottom of my Forstner bit here sets flush with the bottom of the table. Do this for all 4 of your legs. Right like that, and then we're going to switch over to our 3/8 bit. And I've got tape so I know how deep to set these, so I know for a fact we're not going to go through the back side of our piece, but we're also going to go deep enough that you can screw these in and bottom completely out inside the hole. What you should be left with is a 1-inch diameter recess with about a 3/4 inch, 3/8 inch hole in the center. Now it's time to install our feet into the bottom of the table. And what I like to do is thread these feet into the inserts about halfway. This is going to give you something to hammer on to actually set the little pins that are in the bottoms of these inserts. And it's also going to help make sure that you're perfectly centered inside of your hole here. Now, I'll take just a little dab of some glue and put it right inside our hole. This is to make sure if they ever need to back this out at all, they're not just gonna back the entire insert back out of the piece. Now all that's left to do is to tap these into place. Put your insert inside the inner hole. Give it a little tap to start setting it. And then drive it in. Now you can adjust these in. I leave them out about a 1/4 inch from the hole here. So that way when you get to the client's house, they're already pretty close to where they should end up being. And they're not so far into the hole that you're not going to be able to get at them with tools. When you get to where you're setting these up, you definitely want to make sure that almost everything you do is going to be fairly tool-free. Now I'm going to cut the channels for our Z-clips into the top, and I'll show you how that's done. So that's it. This is our final product here. We've got our fully customized epoxy tabletop here on our fully customized base. The base is adjustable. Both of these are set to go through temperature and climate changes. Everything is built to last a lifetime, and even the cup holders are removable to be washed. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what part you found the most interesting or the most confusing so that I know what to work on in my content coming in the future. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. If you need to go back and rewatch any section of this video, feel free. I'll catch you guys next time.